No one can fly this C-130. The runway is destroyed. Crosswinds are level 9, the officer shouted. SEAL team sent SOS. No pilot dared to take off. A calm female voice. Lock coordinates. I'll take off. The entire command center went silent. In the storm, the C-130 roared into the impossible zone. Elena Ward, 29 years old, long brown hair, thin, small frame, was a transport pilot transferred to logistics for being too reckless. She usually sat in corners, only assigned to record flight logs. No one paid attention. Other pilots laughed. You're only good for training flights. Don't have the nerves for combat zones. An officer even said, stay in the cargo bay. Stop dreaming about takeoffs. Elena remained silent, wiping dust from old flight gloves her father had left behind. Once a legendary pilot. What her colleagues didn't understand was that Elena's quiet acceptance of their dismissal wasn't weakness. It was patience, born from understanding that proving herself would require the right moment and the right circumstances. Her transfer to logistics hadn't been punishment for recklessness. It had been bureaucratic response to her willingness to take risks that others wouldn't consider, risks that had saved lives but violated standard operating procedures. The way she studied weather patterns, aircraft specifications, and emergency procedures revealed dedication that went far beyond her assigned duties. She was preparing for scenarios that others hoped would never occur. Her father's flight gloves weren't just personal mementos, they were tangible connection to a legacy of aviation excellence that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be a pilot when lives depended on impossible flights. The mockery she endured from other pilots reflected their inability to recognize that sometimes the most dangerous missions required capabilities that couldn't be measured by conventional standards or official evaluations. During quiet hours, Elena would review flight manuals, study emergency procedures, and practice scenarios in her mind that pushed aircraft performance beyond normal parameters. She understood that routine operations rarely required exceptional skill. Her colleagues saw her methodical preparation as obsessive behavior. They didn't recognize it as operational readiness for situations where standard procedures would be inadequate and innovation would be essential for survival. The logistics assignment that others viewed as career limitation, Elena treated as opportunity to understand aircraft systems at a level that most pilots never achieved. She knew every component, every limitation, every possibility for exceeding normal performance. Her reputation for being too reckless actually reflected her willingness to accept calculated risks that others wouldn't consider, risks that required technical expertise and psychological preparation that few pilots possessed. The old flight gloves served as daily reminder of the aviation tradition she was part of, a tradition that valued mission success over personal safety, that understood some flights were more important than the pilots who flew them. A mechanic whispered, "I once saw her land a C-130 on one wheel when she was still a student." People forget quickly. The storm swept through. News from the front lines. SEAL team trapped. Extraction route destroyed. Command frantically searched for pilots, but no one dared fly. The runway was full of bomb craters. Crosswinds threatened to flip wings. Elena suggested, "I've made emergency landings in desert storms before. Give me a chance." Firmly rejected. That was luck, not skill. When radio carried wounded SEAL distress calls, Elena quietly prepared her flight suit. Clue revealed, in classified files, a line read, "Ward, daughter of Colonel James Ward, pilot missing in action at Khe-Sanh. C-130 control capabilities exceed standards." What the command staff was learning wasn't just about Elena's current capabilities, it was about a family legacy of aviation excellence that had been deliberately hidden from official recognition for operational security reasons. Colonel James Ward hadn't just been missing in action. He had been one of the most skilled transport pilots in military history, known for completing missions that others considered impossible under conditions that would have grounded conventional flights. Elena's training hadn't been limited to standard flight school curriculum. She had been raised by family members who understood aviation at a level that couldn't be taught in classrooms, who had shared knowledge that came from decades of pushing aircraft beyond their supposed limitations. The Desert Storm landing that had been dismissed as luck was actually evidence of capabilities that had been developed through informal training that began long before her official military service. Her excessive preparation for scenarios that seemed unlikely was actually practical application of lessons learned from family stories about missions where standard procedures had been inadequate and innovation had been essential. The classified file notation about her capabilities exceeding standards wasn't bureaucratic exaggeration. It was assessment based on performance that had been observed but not officially acknowledged due to the unconventional nature of her training background. "Why doesn't anyone know about her father?" a junior officer asked, beginning to understand that Elena's story was more complex than official records indicated. The answer revealed the psychological burden that Elena carried. Her father's disappearance during a classified mission had created both inspiration to excel and pressure to prove herself worthy of his legacy. Her willingness to accept dangerous assignments that others avoided wasn't recklessness. It was deliberate choice to honor a tradition of service that prioritized mission success over personal safety. The SEAL team's distress calls weren't just operational emergency. They were personal challenge for Elena, who understood that some situations required exactly the kind of flying that had made her father legendary. As weather conditions worsened and conventional rescue options were eliminated, Elena's unique combination of technical skill and psychological preparation began to appear less like liability and more like exactly what the situation required. The storm that was grounding other aircraft wasn't obstacle to Elena. It was environment she had been preparing for her entire life, conditions that would test everything her father had taught her about flying beyond normal limitations. Her quiet preparation of flight equipment wasn't defiance of orders. It was operational readiness for the moment when command would have to choose between accepting impossible odds or watching good people die. A medic recalled, "The first time I saw her, she carried a wounded soldier out of a burning cargo hold. Didn't wait for anyone to give orders." The growing recognition of Elena's background was transforming her from overlooked logistics personnel to the only person on base with the capabilities necessary for an impossible mission. When command remained silent, Elena broke radio silence. "Lock coordinates. I'll take off." The chief officer shouted, "Ward, you're not authorized." But engines roared to life. The C-130 shook, launching into the storm. Everyone stood silent, watching the radar screen. In the storm, winds flipping wings, radar blind. Elena remembered her father's words. "Trust your instincts. Listen to metal more than computers." She descended altitude, exploited wind gaps, controlled manually instead of autopilot. Twist, through the headset, a SEAL whispered, "Ward, Mosul, you were the one who dropped supplies for us under fire." Truth emerged. She had secretly performed night missions under codename Silent Wing, saving hundreds of soldiers, but due to bureaucratic errors was erased from records. In the sky, she alone fought the storm, bringing the aircraft down on the shattered runway, brakes at only 1/3 power. Wheels smoked, but the plane stopped just meters from the cliff face. SEAL team rushed aboard. The team leader gripped her shoulder. "We owe our lives to Ward, once again." What the witnesses were observing wasn't just exceptional flying, it was the application of skills that had been developed through missions that officially never existed, techniques that pushed aircraft performance beyond what manufacturers had intended. The manual control that Elena had employed instead of autopilot revealed understanding of aircraft dynamics that came from experience with situations where electronic systems had failed, and only human intuition could save lives. Silent Wing wasn't just a code name, it was a legend among Special Operations Forces, representing the mysterious pilot who had appeared during the most dangerous missions, delivering supplies and extracting personnel when no one else would attempt the flights. The Mosul operations that the SEAL had referenced weren't just routine supply drops. They were some of the most dangerous aviation missions of the Iraq War, where pilots had to navigate through enemy fire, adverse weather, and damaged airfields. Elena's erasure from official records hadn't been clerical error. It had been deliberate protection for someone whose capabilities made her too valuable to risk through conventional recognition that might have compromised her ability to operate in classified environments. The storm landing she had just completed required understanding of aircraft limitations that went far beyond training manuals. She had pushed the C-130 beyond its rated performance parameters while maintaining enough control to achieve precision landing on damaged runway. "How many missions like this have you flown?" the SEAL team leader asked as they secured the aircraft. Elena looked at him with eyes that had seen too many impossible flights. Enough to know that sometimes impossible is just another word for necessary. Her response revealed the philosophical foundation that had driven her father's service, and now drove her own. When lives were at stake, normal limitations became irrelevant, and mission success became the only acceptable outcome. The bureaucratic errors that had hidden her achievements weren't just administrative failures. They were systemic problems that had prevented recognition of capabilities that could have been saving lives in official capacity rather than shadow operations. The smoking wheels and damaged brakes that had barely stopped the aircraft short of disaster were evidence of flying that had required split-second timing and precise calculation under conditions that would have overwhelmed most pilots. As the SEAL team prepared for takeoff, Elena was already calculating wind patterns, fuel consumption, and takeoff parameters for what would be an equally dangerous departure from the compromised airfield. The repeated reference to owing their lives to Ward revealed that this wasn't Elena's first rescue of this particular team, that her reputation among Special Operations Forces exceeded her official recognition within the regular military structure. Her father's legacy wasn't just inspiration, it was practical foundation for capabilities that had been tested and proven through operations that required the same combination of technical excellence and psychological courage that had made him legendary. The storm that surrounded them wasn't just weather, it was metaphor for the bureaucratic and procedural obstacles that had hidden Elena's true capabilities while she continued to save lives through unofficial channels. As they prepared for what would be an equally impossible takeoff, everyone on board understood that they were trusting their lives to someone whose expertise had been proven under conditions that few people would survive. At the base, the officer who had once yelled at her stood stunned. "No one could believe you did that." Elena didn't respond, just removed her flight gloves, placed them back on the desk, her father's worn gloves. News spread. SEAL team survived thanks to an impossible flight. Young trainees began practicing more seriously, reminding each other, "Fly like Ward." One night, Elena sat alone outside, looking at the quiet sky, whispering, "Dad, I kept my word." The transformation in base culture was immediate and profound. Elena's demonstration had shattered assumptions about capability, risk assessment, and the nature of aviation excellence under extreme conditions. Her continued humility in the face of extraordinary achievement set a new standard for how aviation excellence should be expressed. While others might have leveraged their heroic reputation for career advancement, Elena remained focused on mission readiness. The worn flight gloves that she continued to use became symbols of generational service, reminders that aviation excellence was tradition passed down through families who understood the true cost of keeping people alive through impossible flights. Training programs throughout the Aviation Command began incorporating Elena's storm flying techniques, though many of her methods couldn't be taught through conventional instruction, but required the kind of intuitive understanding that came from growing up in aviation families. The reference to flying like Ward became shorthand for accepting missions that others wouldn't attempt, for pushing aircraft performance beyond normal parameters when lives depended on exceptional flying. Senior officers quietly reviewed personnel files, looking for other examples of hidden expertise that might have been overlooked due to bureaucratic classifications or unofficial training backgrounds. Elena's example influenced how the military approached risk assessment for rescue operations. Her success demonstrated that some missions required capabilities that exceeded standard evaluations, that impossible odds could be overcome through exceptional skill and preparation. The story of the impossible flight became part of aviation folklore, passed down through pilot training programs as example of what could be achieved when technical excellence met moral courage. 6 months later, Elena was quietly assigned to a classified aviation unit where her capabilities could be officially utilized rather than hidden. It was recognition that came late, but acknowledged the true scope of her expertise. The old flight gloves remained on her desk, daily reminder of the legacy she carried and the tradition she was continuing through service that honored both personal sacrifice and mission success. Her father's memory was preserved not through monuments or official recognition, but through continued excellence that saved lives and inspired others to exceed their own perceived limitations. I will live kindly. If you believe that quiet people also deserve to be remembered forever. Elena Ward's story isn't just about a flight. It reminds us that many heroes live silently, pushed aside, but when the moment comes, they're ready to step into the impossible. Sometimes, one person's trust and courage is enough to change the fate of a team, a community. Society often easily forgets good people just because they're quiet, but they are the foundation that keeps everything standing. The lesson: cherish and give opportunities to those who seem invisible. They might be the heroes when you need them most. Her journey teaches us that the most valuable people are often the most overlooked ones. They choose service over recognition, legacy over personal advancement, mission success over individual safety. They measure their worth not by what they receive, but by what they preserve and protect. The real lesson isn't about aviation techniques or storm flying. It's about recognizing that extraordinary people often choose ordinary roles, and that our assumptions about capability can blind us to the heroes who are waiting for the moment when their skills will be truly needed. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI content.